make a new project today, and it is this pattern. It's a McCalls pattern, and there's two different versions, pretty much. One has like a shirt tail type outline in the front, and the other one is flat, and there's sleeve variations. But funny thing, this is actually the second time that I'm going to make this today. The first time I made it, I went off script way too much because I did so many special things that after a while I was like, I'm not even following this pattern anymore. So this is take two. I want to show you what I did for take one though. Basically, I turned it into a nightgown. So I did all kinds of lace inserts and things in the sleeves and all of this in the back and everything. And yeah, it's lovely. And actually, I did film step by step how to do all of the lace. But unfortunately, that whole SD card became corrupted and all the video disappeared, so it's gone anyway. But if you're ever interested in how to do heritage lace things, let me know and maybe I'll do a short thing, just tutorial on that. But anyway, what I'm going to be doing today is this version here with the long sleeves and the shirt tail. And it is a pretty easy pattern, you know, unless you throw a whole bunch of extra stuff on it. It's a very basic pattern. I want to just show a couple things when I'm doing it, a different way of doing this little front opening than the way that your directions have. Possibly showing you a new way to do a rolled hem, just little things, but just be aware that the length on this pattern is pretty long. That nightgown comes, you know, almost between my shins and my ankles on me. And that was cutting it out based on this. And I am like 5'4". So just be aware. I'm actually going to be making this one slightly shorter because I want this one to be more of like a tunic-y shirt than a nightgown length dress. So what I'm going to be doing this time, because this is my plan B, I am going to be using up some purple stuff. I'm going to combine two just because, you know, bright and cheerful, and it is dark enough that you won't be able to see through it in case I wear it as a dress type thing. Will I do it? We'll see. I'll make it as long as I want to. We'll just take it from there. So I'm going to be making the body out of this. It's a poly cotton broadcloth. And I'm going to be doing the sleeves and the little plackety kind of opening and neckband and stuff out of this purpley flowered calico. So a combination of the two. I'll have plenty of fabric, and it'll be a good hanging around the garden type of thing because it's all cotton in the sleeves. Because I have to wear long sleeves in the summer when I'm outside pretty much because I burned this arm really bad several years ago, and now if it's in the sunshine for any length of time, it burns really quickly. So long sleeves are good for me. So let's get started. Okay, so I got my sleeve cut out of my calico, and I've decided I'm going to shorten the dress by 5 inches. That way it's not going to be as long, should hit a little bit at-ish, my knees-ish. Okay, so this is how I'm going to shorten it. These 2 dots here mark where my pocket is going to be, and the pocket actually hangs down probably to right about where this line is. So I want to shorten it down here. I don't really want to shorten it up here, and I want to make sure I don't take it so short my pocket sticks out because that wouldn't be cool. So what I'm going to do is take it up 5 inches and using their lengthen or shorten here so I can keep the shape of the bottom, I'm going to fold it 2.5 inches based over here at the edge. Okay, so right here, I have it to 2.5 inches. Is it the same here? Yes. All right, so when I folded that, 2.5 and 2.5 is 5. So this is taking it 5 inches. And what I'll do is just change that cutting line so that it evens out all the way down. So that's how I'm going to be cutting it. I think that that'll give me plenty of room for my pocket to hang down, but not pooch out, and be a nicer length for me for what I want from this top. One thing I wanted to point out when we're thinking of cutting this front piece, just ignore these red lines. That's something else. But it has it where you can slice in and up. The way that I'm going to do it, I am not cutting this right now. So even though it has it as a cutting line to right now come down and over and cut that open, I will not, and I will show you why in just 1 minute. Okay, so after cutting out the main fabric, the next thing is to cut out interfacing for, this is, what do they call this piece? Front band. It's like a placket for the front and also for the collar band. So we'll need one of these, which is cut on a fold, and two of these little rectangle pieces. And I am using, it's called a featherweight. It's, to me it feels more like a medium weight, but it's called a featherweight fusible Pellon type interfacing. Alrighty, so the way that I put on interfacing, okay, so what I do is I iron my fabric first with a hot steam iron. Then I place the fusible side down on my interfacing, and I just push it straight up and down. I do not wiggle my iron, I just set it down, hold it for a little bit, move it over to the next spot, hold it for a little bit, because I don't want to stretch that interfacing at all. I don't want to get it kajingered up on the fabric. I want those little fusy dots to melt. So now that I have that, I turn it over to the fabric side, and now I can iron this, just to make sure there are no bubbles or wrinkles or anything from the right side. And I don't mark until after I have my interfacing fused on. So I'm going to do these other pieces and go back to the table. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is mark my little placket pieces, and I'm going to be marking it on the outside. There are marks on your center front you need to mark also. So go ahead and do the dots for the pockets and all the notches and everything, but make sure, like I said, we haven't cut this yet. For right now, mark all of the circles and all of the notches on your front piece. Okay, so here are my dots on my center front of my front piece. Now, these two dots here are marking the bottom corners of that placket when it's all done. So what I'm going to do, it's an inch between them. All right, so I am going to draw, I'm using the blue one, it's still heat erasable, but I'm drawing a line from those two all the way up. Now, I'm also going to draw a line down the very center. And I'm going to stop it about in half an inch before those dots. Okay? And now I'm going to draw a line from the bottom of this line diagonally to each one of those dots. So here's my lines here that I drew. Okay? Now, these pieces, there's one for each side, so there'll be one piece over here and one piece over here. The end product is we're going to have two 1-inch wide strips layered one exactly on top of each other, centered over these two dots. Now the directions want you to do it one way. I'm going to show you the way that I would do it, and you can choose which one you want. So the first thing I'm going to do is fold these in half and press them, and then I'm going to press them in. Where this dot is 3/8 of an inch. Draw my little guideline on here. This white does not want to show up. So that I know where to fold. You see my line that I just drew? So I'll fold it on that line, and then it will be folded in the middle and the same on the other side. So I'll end up with something that looks kind of like a very wide piece of bias tape. Right, so I have my two strips here. See how they've been folded into the inside? And if you can picture, one is going to be here opening up over here, and the other is going to be on top of it opening up over here. So at this point, I am going to cut down the very middle along that line I drew. And then I'm going to cut my diagonal going to my dots. Now these strips are longer than these dots, so that's what you want. If your strips aren't longer, you have a problem. But you can tell which one goes where, I mean, how they're oriented, because part of this top piece is slanted. So that's following the slant of this neck piece. So what I'm going to do is slide it in here. So here, say, is the dot, and I have the tail just kind of loose there. What I want to do is attach this so that this line that I drew is going right up against the edge of my folded piece. And I can tell right now I need to trim this just like a little bit further. Okay, so I have that there. I'm going to close it up. And then I'm going to run a stitch on the edge from the outside from this dot all the way up. I'm not going to worry about this stuff down here. That's not my problem right now. And so just from this point up is how I'm going to run it. Okay, so I have the one side done. I'm just going to flip it over here out of the way while I do my other side. And again, making sure that my top is aligned right and that I have enough clip down at the bottom. Okay, so here's the front of my top, and here's my two little strips that I just sewed on. All right, the dots are right here, about 3/4 of an inch from the bottom of this. Now what we need to do is put the bottoms of these little straps on the inside. So I'm just going to kind of tuck them in here, one right on top of the other. Okay, so they're just inside there, nice and snug. Now if we go on the inside, so here's the inside. Here are my two strips. You know what, let me just clip those together to keep them from moving right now. All right. So here's my two strips, one overlapping the other, and there's this little triangle that was part of that right between the two dots that we clipped. All right, so now what I need to do is make sure this is nice and straight, and I can vaguely see where my dots are. The little white is peeking through. I need to sew a seam, making sure that these straps on this side are still on top of each other. So I'm going to put a clip up here on this side too. So here are this is the inside of it. This is the end of my straps. This is that little triangle, and I need to sew a seam straight across the base of that triangle. That's going to lock in these straps and seal up the bottom of my little placket. Okay, so here is the bottom of my placket. What I did is I ran a little, from looking at it from the front, I ran a little top stitch across the bottom here, you know, kind of matching up with the theme of this one I had coming down the front. And then turning it upside down after that, I ran a little stitch straight across my triangle, holding it in. And I'm just gonna pink this because it's a little bit bulky down there, and we're gonna call that edge good and move on from here. Okay, so there are 4 pocket pieces, 2 for the front, 2 for the back. So I'm gonna grab 2 of them. There is a notch in the pocket, and you line that up with the notch on the dress. And what that does is it should put these little dots that are here 5/8 of an inch in. So what we're going to do is sew the pockets at a 3/8 inch seam allowance, just a straight stitch down here. Well, I just looked at the directions, and it says to use a 1/4 inch for this seam allowance. I don't think that it's going to cause a major problem that I use 3/8. So, but one thing the instructions do not say is to overstitch at this point, and I'm going to do that because that really helps the pockets lay flat. On this side, on the pocket side, with all the seam allowances pushed towards the pockets, I'm going to be doing a row of stitching about 1/8 of an inch in, right along this edge, right there, all the way across on both pockets. So at this point, this is what my pocket looks like. It's been sewn on, then you see like a top stitching type row there just to hold it nice and flat. Now what I need to do is do the same thing with the back. There's no opening, of course, but to put the pockets on the back in the same way that we just did. Okay, so this is my back piece that I have pockets attached to. And I'm going to lay my front on top of that so the right sides are together. Match up these side seams. So I have my back and my front pinned together. And the way that I'm going to be sewing this, I'm going to start up underneath the armhole. Raise you up here. Starting up here under the armhole, add a 5/8 inch seam allowance, comes straight down. At this point where my top dot is, I'm going to reinforce a couple stitches, make a pivot, come in, go all the way around my pocket, come back up to the lower dot. Again, going to reinforce and make a pivot, and then take that straight down. Everything here is at 5/8. Once I get that done, then I'm going to take it to my serger, and I'm going to run it through my serger around this edge, pivot, around, pivot down. All right, so this is my side seam. This is my pocket, and I have pressed the side seam down just to make it nice and smooth and ready to go. Now, something you can do is once you press it, if you get a block, a clapper block, or mine's just a piece of wood, and push it down after you have ironed it, when you still have that heat and that steam in there, that's really going to help permanently set that crease for your pocket. And then I'm making my other notches, and what I'm going to do is fold the two together and with the right sides together and sew up that seam at a 5/8 inch allowance. And then after I do that, I will be serging it. Alrighty, so this is one of my sleeves, and I am going to be pressing the seam allowance towards the back. The back has the clip. And then at the bottom, we're going to be turning it up, making a hem type casing. Now the directions want you to fold up on a fold line that's printed on the pattern, which looks to be like about 5/8, and then turn it under for a skinny little casing. For a skinny little casing. I want to make sure my bodkin can go through, and these sleeves are big enough to handle it. So I'm actually going to make mine a little bit wider. Is just tuck it in about 1/4 inch or so. Stick a couple pins in there, and then I'm going to sew this seam all the way around, leaving an opening that's big enough that I can slide my bodkin through. Now for the elastic for this, what the pattern says is to measure your wrist and then add 1 inch. So my wrist is about 6 inches, so I'm going to cut 2 pieces of 1/4 inch elastic that are 7 inches, because that's my wrist plus 1 inch. Okay, so here's my little gap, and I am just going to use my bodkin to push it through, and then before my tail disappears completely, I'm just going to stick a little straight pin into it to keep it out here. Now this elastic is small enough and thin enough that I'm just going to overlap the two edges, the two ends, probably overlap them by about 1/2 inch and stitch over them just to hold them together. And then I'm going to come back and sew back up these little stitches where the opening is. Okay, so I have my sleeves, I have my dress body, and it's time to put the sleeves on. So what I'm going to do is open up my dress sideways. So I have my front up here, my back's over here. This is one sleeve opening, and put the sleeve that matches the right side. So this is my back, and I know that the sleeve that has the little clip that indicates it's the back will fit here, right sides together, then it's the right one. So I match up my seams, I match up my notches, go ahead and pin it the rest of the way. Now once I get these pinned on, it'll be time to come back and sew them on. So we'll come back and sew this seam at 5/8 all the way around, well, all the way down and up on both sides, and then I will come back and serge that edge just the same as I did for these, where I'm serging both pieces at the same time. Okay, so at this point, this is what our dress looks like, and I went ahead and also ran some serge stitching around the edge. Now when I do this, I'm not chopping off big chunks of fabric. I'm barely taking off any loose little hairs and everything, because I want to maintain the actual size of the fabric that the pattern indicates. I don't want to go chopping into there. So I have to put some gathering stitches in here, because we're going to be gathering this whole thing into a little neckband. So what I am going to do is put my very, very strong thread into my bobbin, because it's the bobbin threads that you want to pull when you're doing your gathering stitches. They just pull so much easier, and especially on something like this where I'm going over multiple seam allowances and it is a wide amount that I'm putting into something kind of small. I want to make sure nothing breaks. So I'm going to switch out my super thread into the bobbin and run 2 rows of stitching. One row is going to be just barely inside all of this serging at 1/4 inch. The next row will be just beyond that at about 3/8 of an inch. Now I got to tell you something. Neckbands are one of those things that are just going to be the death of me someday. And to make it so that it's actually going to work exactly like they have, you have to be very precise. So what they want is they want you to come in, and on this piece that has all your interfacing on it, they want you to fold it up to a 5/8 inch seam allowance, press it all in, work it all in, get a nice crease, then come back and trim. Okay? I am going to trim first, because then I'll have less bulk in here when I go to press in. But in order to make sure that I actually am trimming the right amount, I'm going to mark it, because they want you to trim it down to 3/8 and it starts at 5/8, so I'm going to be trimming off 1/4. So I'm just going to go ahead and mark my 1/4 inch all the way around, and then I'm going to trim off along that line. Okay, so you can see I have a little dotted line marked around here. I am going to go ahead and trim that right now and mentally make a note that my new seam allowance that I need to fold to is 3/8 of an inch. So with that, now I'm going to come around and put just a few marks at 3/8 of an inch, so when I go over to my ironing board, I can make sure that I am actually folding it in the right amount. So one thing I want to mention right now is, if you are doing this pattern, it would be easier for you at this point if, instead of interfacing the entire band, if you had only cut interfacing to go in the part that is not turned under, the part within the seam allowances. When you're working in all of this fullness here on something that has a lot of interfacing on it, it's a lot more difficult than working in fullness on something that is not interfaced. So what I do is I just kind of work it in with the tip of my iron instead of just chunking right on top of it first. Once I have it worked in with the tip, you can see this part is already started, then I can kind of come back over it and try to work in the rest. I hover, I'm not pushing down actually, I'm just hovering over it with steam and then I push it in. And it's the steam itself that's going to kind of try to mold and shrink some of those fibers into place and stuff. But that's a lot more tricky with all this interfacing. I'm going to show you something right now. Okay, so I was saying that it would be much better for this neckband piece if you only cut the interfacing to the part that actually is not going to be folded and is not going to be in a seam allowance or something. And I want to show you an easy way of making a pattern for that. So this seam allowance for the top part is 3/8 of an inch. And we can tell that because from this circle, the center of that circle to the edge is 3/8. This seam allowance here is 5/8. We can tell that because the center of the circle out is 5/8. So what we need to do is get a pattern for just that middle. This is a really cool trick. First I'm going to do the outside. This is a 5/8 inch seam allowance. I get my little guide, set the little adjuster pointy part to 5/8. Okay? I am going to run this edge on the outside of the pattern. This is wax paper, by the way. I have taped it down with the pattern piece underneath it. Okay? So I'm going to run this on the outside edge. This is going to scratch where my new pattern should be. Okay, I'm going to scratch the fold line here for the center back. Then I'm going to do the same thing at 3/8 on the top. Okay, so now you probably can't see it because it is just wax paper, but I can see where my cutting lines should be for my interfacing pattern. Because the thing is, there's going to be so much bulk inside this tiny little band. And if you can keep it interfaced where it needs to be interfaced, but omit it where it does not and where it's just adding bulk to make it more difficult, you're going to win. So here's my new little pattern piece. And I'm just going to set it on top here. I'm going to line it up so it's 3/8 inch from the top. See if you can see that. So now, if I was to do this again, and honestly, just about any neckband, a lot of dresses, that linen dress had this type of a neckband. Just from the beginning, if you want to do this trick, and it's just, you know what your seam allowances are going to be based on the markings and your instructions, and cut yourself a separate pattern for your interfacing. This is a tailoring trick here too. It would just make life easier. So I'm going to go ahead, go finish fighting with that crease I'm trying to press into that, and I will be right back. So this is the one that I press the edge under, okay? And it is face up. The piece that does not have interfacing, I have on top of it, face down. I have some clips here making sure that these pressed under edges stay pressed under. Just going to put a few more on. We're going to be sewing the center part here from the point where it's folded up all the way around here at a 3/8 inch seam allowance. Instructions do not say anything about understitching, but recommended. So I am going to come and pink. I'm leaving like 1/8 of an inch with no cutting, and I'm pinking the outside edge of this to give it a little more flexibility when we turn it. And then we're going to understitch this top seam. Okay, now for the understitching, which is not in the instructions, but I'm going to do it because the neckband will lay so much better. All of this seam allowance, I am pressing back towards the side that has the interfacing. Okay, you can't do all the way up here, just start wherever you can. So good morning. It is the next day, and I've been thinking a lot about this. Now, just like on the collar here, where it would be much better, especially on a blouse or something where you're using a light fabric, there's too much interfacing. I like interfacing. I like the substance it gives, but I don't like these. And the reason is it's too stiff for this fabric. And I think one layer of this interfacing would be fine, even two. But the problem is because the whole thing is interfaced, I've got 4 layers of it here. And that's just making it too stiff, which in turn you have this squared off edge down here. And I just think that that's not going to jive with the rest of the feel of the fabric. So I was laying in bed this morning and I just decided, you know what? I've done it the way the pattern wants. This is the way the pattern wants it, you know. But because this is going to be my garment, I'm going to do it the way I want. So before I gather all of these stitches together, I'm going to redo this placket and I will show you how. So first things first, get out my seam ripper and I'm going to pull these 2 lines of stitching out and this down here and remove this placket. Okay, so I've got it off and I ironed it with a little bit of starch just to give it some body. So I'm back to square one for here. So here's my plan. What I'm going to be doing is cutting one long strip that is the width of this pattern piece, but the length is going to be more than twice as long. So I'm going to make it 21 inches long and this wide. Okay, not interfaced yet, but just one long strip. I'll be right back. Okay, so my finished width that I need my band to be is 1 inch. So I have my strip of fabric, and this is what I'm going to be using. It is just a woven fusible interfacing, okay? But it's already cut into a 1 inch strip. So you can just cut a single 1 inch strip of whatever fusible interfacing you're going to be using. But what I'm going to do is fold this in half and press it so I have a nice crease. And then I am going to fuse my interfacing all the way down on one side of that crease. So I ironed it on here and then I turned up the edge and pressed it in just so I have a very nice guaranteed 1 inch wide strip here. And I'm just playing with it to see, is that stiff enough? If it's not stiff enough, I can always add a second row over here. But by doing it in 2 pieces, I'm able to make this fold nicely, no bulk on the fold, no bulk over here. And because my fabric is so lightweight, I think this is fine. So I'm going to go ahead and fold the other side in and press it so that it's a straight 1 inch band the whole way. Okay, so now I want to fold this side that does not have interfacing up, and I want to make sure that it's exactly the width that I want. So I want to show you something I do. When I'm doing something like this, I like one side of it to be just a hair longer than the other. And I like to put that side that's like a 1/16 of an inch or less that's longer on the underneath when I'm top stitching. That way I'm guaranteed to catch it. So here's what I do. I have this side folded in and I have a nice crisp edge here. I'm just going to turn the raw edge over and iron it over because that way I have a nice guideline and I don't have to guess. I'm just pushing it to make sure it's nice all the way down. And then I can open this side and tuck it in. And it's exactly where I want it to be, just peeking out very, very slightly, exactly like I want. Let me give it one more press. And that is done. That's so much easier. See if you can see here. There. So if you can see that the bottom edge here, it just barely is peeking out, but just enough that I can make sure that I'm going to catch it with my needle. So now what I need to do before I start sewing this is to redraw my stitching line. That way I have a nice guide to go by. So I hope you can see I have 2 lines drawn up and one going across, making sure that My stitching line is on the outside of my little clips where my circles were. And now, the way I'm going to sew this is you open this up flat so that it's like one straight line. All right? And starting up at the top, I'm going to slide my little casing over it and line up that stitching, the edge of my, come on, slide over there, lining up the edge of my placket, that fold edge, with the line that I drew. Okay? And I'm not going to be pinning it, I'm just going to be holding it and doing it on my machine. But I'm going to be doing a little top stitch all the way down this edge. Always stop with the needle down. Make sure I get over that clipped area. So you can see the inside, because it was slightly longer, it made sure I caught all that stitching, so that's good. But let's say this side is going to go up front, okay? Come down here, we're going to press this into a little point shape at the bottom. So now all that bulk, instead of being tucked inside, it's going to be on the outside, but I've got a little point down here. So I'm going to press this and then come back and top stitch over that little point. So down here, I hope you can see I did top stitching. I went straight across and along each edge, back up. So I have this part stitched down. So what I have now is my little placket, which is much, much more suitable to this fabric weight. And honestly, I believe that that is a much easier way to do a placket than the two and then tucking them in and then overstitching. And you don't get that funky like gap. It's like a crevice that forms, and it really is going to want to make a pucker like that. And that pucker's not pretty. So my preferred method, it's not the way the pattern says, but it's going to work just as well. And now we have less bulk up here on top, so that when we're trying to fit everything inside of the neckband, it's going to be a lot easier and a lot smoother right here. So what I need to do now is, before I gather, remark all of my dots on my neckband. I've ironed it so much they've disappeared. And honestly, the dots, they blend with this busy print. So I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. Okay, so what I do is I've got these little tapes. They actually usually are with like the scrapbooking type supplies. They're called paper tapes. This is what I was looking for to use when I'm pleating things that are annoying, like knits and slinky things. I use these. It's called paper tape. But anyway, it comes in all different bright colors so that you can use it. But I just put a little piece of that on here, and I put a little line where my dot is going to be, and this is my center back. And that way it's very plain. I can see it easily. I can sew over this no problem. I can pull it off when I'm done, and it just makes life a lot easier. So I've got that marked, and now I'm going to go ahead and match up all of my marks. My center back, this is where the top of my shoulder is, and this mark, this is where the band is going to be. Between this edge and this mark is where that front band goes. So let me get that pinned on and start gathering. when you're lining up the front, this point here, where all the little fold and the interfaced part and everything ends, that's the point that is going to line up at that 5/8 inch mark with your edge of your band. Don't worry about all this stuff that's sticking out here. That's going to get either tucked in or trimmed away or something, but you want to make sure that this point here is the biggie, that it's just at where the side of this band comes down. Now I have my super thread on my bobbin, which is the white one, so I can tell pretty easily which one I'm going to pull. So what I'm going to be doing is just pulling those 2 white threads aside, and all of this other stuff that is just in my way here, I'm going to wrap up around a pin so that I don't have to deal with it while I'm adjusting my gathers. So I have it sewn on now, and before I do anything else, I want to go around the outside and tug on it just to make sure everything is lying the way I want it to. So with that done, I can pull off my little tapes. What they want you to do is just fold your outer part in and slip stitch it down. That's fine. That's a good thing, but I have got a whole bunch of bulk right here. And my whole goal of this is to have a neckband that is as light and comfy as the lightweightness of this blouse should be. So I'm actually going to come back before I do that and trim off some of that bulk. Over here you can probably see. What I'm going to be doing is cutting off the serged top. And you need to have it serged or zigzagged or something before you gather, or else you're going to make just a big mess up there. But it causes a lot of bulk at this point, and when I take it off, especially when I'm pinking it off, it's so much flatter, you know, and it doesn't hinder the strength of this stitch at all. So I'm just going to do that the rest of the way around. So when you're getting ready to turn this collar, to press it, or I mean to close it up, make sure you trim all the stuff. Let's see if you can, all the stuff that would be sticking out right here at the very edge. Just cut that off at an angle like that, so that you get all the bulk out of there. Now, I need to point out, I am not a fan of pressing things under way before you are going to use it. And I did it because that's what the pattern said, but it never lines up exactly right. So I'm opening that pressed edge up, and in my opinion, you can just skip that step. Because when you get to this point, then you'll know exactly how far in you need to turn your fabric under so that you can cover that edge. And invariably, you're either like a 1/16 of an inch too short here and an 1/8 of an inch too long there or something. It's the way things go. So what I'm doing is I'm going to go back, and as I go, turn it and press it so that at this edge right here, it just barely covers that stitch line. And then what they want you to do is come back and by hand just slip stitch this whole side down. Alrighty, so this is what it looks like right now. We've got it whip stitched on the inside. Whip stitched on the inside here, just holding it down. There are no buttons or anything on this. It's a high enough opening that it shouldn't really matter. If it really bothers you, you can always come and put a little snap or something in here, but I think it's going to be fine. So because of that, the last thing that I have to do is the hem. Now, there's 2 bottom options on this pattern. One is just flat across, and one is rounded like a shirt tail, which is what I did. And because it is a shirt tail, I am going to be using a rolled hem foot to hem this. It'll give it that tiny little rolled hem like a tailored shirt would. But in order to do that, If you've ever worked with a rolled hem foot, angles like this are a nightmare. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is open this seam about 1/2 inch, and that way I can tackle the front separately from the back. So just a heads up, rolled hem foots are trouble. They just are. They work a lot better if you're doing just a plain straight edge. But with that being said, this is how I do it. So I just start turning under my edge, maybe an 1/8 of an inch and an 1/8 of an inch, just to get it started here. I just have my foot sitting on top. And I'm going to put a couple stitches in, just to get it started. Then I raise my foot, pull this fabric up. There's this little swirly in there, and if it's not going to go up easily, use a little pin tip to pull it in. Put it back down. Now the key that seems to work for me is I try to roll it a little bit before, and I only work about maybe 3 inches at a time, and I tend to hold it over to the side. And use 2 hands. If it looks like it's a curve, like this curve is going to be the hardest part. Along the bottom is not going to be as difficult. So I'm going to try to do this with the camera in my way here. If we can get around the curve, then we're good. And you see how I just kind of, if it looks like it's a curvy, troublesome place, I use the tip of my little pin to bring it back up where it needs to be. So if you have one of these feet and you've never used it, I suggest just getting a straight piece of fabric and tearing it so you are 100% on the straight, and playing with it with that before you try to do any curves. It's not a fast way at all, but what you get is get this thread out of the way, a nice little edge that looks like a shirt tail type of a hem. Alright, so I have the rolled hem done, and I just want to give you a little look at what it does. These rolled hem feet, they're nice, and they come in various sizes, but they can be quite troublesome going around curves. And I don't care how careful you are when you're going on a curve, you're going to have some things that look kind of like this sideways puckering, and that's just because of the nature of the thing. But in general, for a purpose like this, it makes a nice hem. Now if you don't have a rolled hem foot, just do any kind of narrow hem that you want. Rolling it up by hand and stitching it by hand is fine. Just enjoy it, take your time, even put lace on it, for crying out loud. We need more lace. But with that being mentioned, I want to show you something. Well, I know I briefly showed you this nightgown at the very beginning, but now that we've gone through all of the steps to make up this pattern, I want to show it to you one more time, just because the pattern itself can be pretty versatile because it is very, very basic. It's just fronts, backs, got this diagonal deal going here. So honestly, it depends on how fancy you want to make it, what fabrics you want to make it out of, and everything is going to alter the final look. So the last piece, it comes with this tie. It's a belt thing. So what we're going to do is basically sew together the end, fold it in half, stitch it lengthwise, leave a gap in the middle so you can turn the ends. Turn it and press it. The basic tie that's with a whole bunch of different patterns. Okay, so here is my belt, my sash, and I have sewn it together, folded it in half, and stitched it. Now I left an opening a few inches long right here because I'm going to turn, that way I can turn one side and then the other, and I don't have to turn the whole thing at one time, just to make my life easier. So I'm using this kind of a turner today, which works well for belts and things. I just noticed something. Before I turn it, you see that little point? I'm going to clip off that point and I'm going to trim this corner just so I can get a little less bulk when I turn it. So I do that until I see my little point come out. Open it up. I can just slide it the rest of the way out. So I'm going to do the other side, and then I'll press this flat, stitch my opening closed, and we'll be done. Alrighty. Am I have sound? Yes, I have sound. Okay, so this one is done. And let's just call it what it is. It's an ugly house dress. Okay? But I think that there's, a couple lessons that we can learn from it. And one is that when a pattern calls for what seems like a lot of interfacing, there is a way to take that amount of interfacing down. And that little trick that I showed you using the wax paper and a seam gauge to be able to make a new pattern for your interfacing can come in handy. Sorry, my cat just bumped the tripod. And the other thing is the way that they did the placket. Stop it. The way they did the placket, there are several ways to do these types of openings. And so if you're doing a pattern and you don't like the look of it, there's nothing that says you have to stick with it. And honestly, this is just one of many, many ways to deal with an opening of this kind. So just find something that works for you. So with all of that, I think that this pattern would work well for a house dress, for a like homebound elderly type of person who wants something that will be modest to cover them, is easy to put on, is not going to be binding in any way. This will work well. As far as something that you can wear out of the house and look lovely and feel just top-notch in, yeah, this is not it at all. But you know, every garment has its place, and just because this isn't that type of garment doesn't mean it's not going to serve its purpose somewhere else. So anyhow, but with that in mind, it did make a really nice nightgown. And you could see, oh my cat, I am so sorry. And you can see the way that I did it on that nightgown that I did with the lace and everything. I think that did turn out pretty. She's rubbing on the camera. Oh, sorry about that. Anyhow, just try to look at patterns as what can I do to tweak this to make it work for me. And for me, the only way this pattern is going to work for me is to throw a crap load of lace onto it and make it a nightgown. But if you're looking for this type of a house dress thing for somebody, you know, it went together pretty well. Once you get past these issues, it really went together pretty well. So I hope you like it. Bye-bye.